Seekers. How you doing? Before I get started with today's topic, I thought I would say something about Ziggy Zen Dog, who's sitting right here. You can't see him, but he looks really cute. Ziggy is the best dog in the world. He's tilting his head as I say his name. I just want to say that. Very interesting thing happened the other day. As I've talked about on this channel a couple of times, my dad passed away just before Thanksgiving of 2022, so not that long ago. And I've been processing the grief around that in various weird ways. So a couple of days ago, I had a bad day and I just kind of broke down crying and sobbing on the floor. I actually slid down and sat on the floor crying, and my wife was kind of there, sitting there patting me on the shoulder. And Ziggy came up to me and he actually crawled into my lap as I sat there on the floor sobbing. And this is not typical Ziggy behavior. He's not a lap dog. In fact, he's kind of a little too big. He's not a big dog, but he's just a little bit too big to be a lap dog. So he's a bit heavy on my lap. But it was really nice. It was really sweet. And it just, I've read a lot of different things about dogs since getting a dog. I had dogs when I was a kid. And then for a long time, I didn't have any dogs in my life. And so getting this dog, I started reading up about dogs. And a lot of people have different theories about how dogs are vis-a-vis love, whether they can feel love or not. And there's this kind of weird theory online that you find here and there that says dogs can feel love, that's what makes them unique among animals, that dogs can feel love. Well, what happened the other day demonstrated to me, among a few things that have happened between me and Ziggy, that dogs definitely do feel love in something very much similar to the way human beings feel love. Because there was nothing to gain by crawling up on my lap. He wasn't going to get any food. He wasn't going to get any extra attention or anything. He knew that something was going on with me, and that he knew that the way to help me was to crawl up on my lap and to be affectionate towards me. And it made me think that if a dog can feel love and a human can feel love, then maybe love is something that is not exclusive to, it's obviously not exclusive to human beings if a dog can feel it. But I think that the people who are saying that it's exclusive to dogs and humans are just being stupid. Just my personal opinion. If dogs can feel it and humans can feel it, then it must go beyond just dogs and humans. Maybe it just goes through every animal, and maybe it just goes through everything that there is. Maybe love is a more universal thing. So there you go. Just some thoughts about dogs and about Ziggy. So Ziggy's a good dog. Anyway, I had a question and I thought I would give you some thoughts on it, and here it goes. Here's the Buddhist portion of my talk today, my video today. Here's the question. It seems to me that in Buddhist circles, when comparing Tibetan Mahayana Buddhism to Zen Buddhism is also Mahayana Buddhism, by the way. I think some people get the impression that the word Mahayana Buddhism is exclusive to Tibetan Buddhism. I don't know if this writer does, but I've heard people use it in a way that they seem to think that Tibetan Buddhism equals Mahayana Buddhism, but Zen Buddhism is also part of Mahayana Buddhism. There seems to be two types of enlightenment. The one being the ability to see the insubstantiality or emptiness of things and phenomena, which the Dalai Lama teaches about often, and the other being the wordless and thought-free ultimate reality of reality taught in Zen. Because when all is said and done, as it were, reality, if we were to call it anything, has no words or thoughts attached to it. So basically what I'm saying is that there is the inconceivable, non-conceptual reality, and it is alluded to in the Diamond Sutra, the best version to be found in Dwight Goddard's A Buddhist Bible, or perhaps here, and he gives a link. But there is also emptiness of inherent existence and the perception thereof, if non-Zen Mahayana Buddhism, which seems to be a different animal altogether, any thoughts about this? And I did have some thoughts about this, but I don't know if my thoughts are kind of exactly what this questioner had in mind, but I'll tell you what it kind of brought up. There are different kinds of ideas about enlightenment, right? And people try to sort of rank them and talk about different types of enlightenment or different ranks of enlightenment. And what this question got me thinking is there's a sort of bog standard view of reality. And bog standard, I don't know if I'm using it correctly. I've been going back and forth to England a lot in the past 12 years, I guess. I've gone maybe 11 or 12 times. And it's a phrase I've picked up, and I knew a lot of British people when I lived in Japan. So, and I knew a lot of British people when I lived in Kenya, so I picked up a lot of British English. I'm not sure if I'm using that correctly, but it's a bog being the slang for a toilet. And the bog standard view is sort of like the common view, but bog being standard for toilet, it gives me the impression of like a really low level sort of view. So that's what I'm trying to use it to mean. And if any British people out there are listening, you can correct me if I'm using it wrong. But there's a sort of bog standard view of reality. And the bog standard view of reality is that the view of reality we all kind of grew up with and we all kind of accepted. And it's that, and the bog standard view of reality is we assume kind of the same for everybody, but that's probably an incorrect assumption. Probably the bog standard view of reality is a little bit different for each person. So each person's bog standard view of reality is probably a bit different, but we don't know it. But we sort of share words in common and ways of framing the bog standard view of reality in common. And so we believe that we share a standard bog standard view of reality with each other, and we're all sort of, and we all kind of grow up believing that is reality. So when you embark on a meditation practice, one of the first things that starts to happen is that bog standard view of reality, the grip that the bog standard view of reality has on you begins to kind of loosen. And initially, when that starts to loosen, you start to kind of see beyond the bog standard view of reality. And once you start to see beyond the bog standard view of reality, the first sort of glimpses you get outside of the bog standard view of reality are, I think for most of us, shocking. It was for me. So shocking that I think most people's first impressions or first experiences of that are to think, oh my God, I've got it. I've like, whoa, I've transcended, I've reached the ultimate. This is often what happens when people take LSD or shrooms and things. I mean, not every time everybody takes LSD or shrooms, but a lot of people who take LSD, shrooms, hallucinogens, things like that, psychedelics, will get that impression. They'll be like, my God, I've reached the ultimate. I've like, whoa, I've transcended. I've got the God's eye view of things, and that's why. For example, Kobun Chino Roshi, my first Zen teacher's teacher, was asked once what is the most difficult what's the most difficult part of dealing with Zen students, and he said when they've had their first enlightenment experience, because most of us, when we have our first sort of so-called enlightenment experience of any level, think we've just got it all, and then we're like, oh, look, I'm amazing. You got this great, wonderful experience of reality, and then you've got to be taken down a few pegs, and that's when it becomes really good to have a teacher. And so your teacher's job at that point is to kind of say, yeah, that happens to everybody. Okay, you've got to work on this. But if you work on it and you start to get comfortable with it, at least this has been my trajectory. There was that initial like whoa moment that happened fairly early on in my practice, and then it was years, like decades, of nothing before anything else happened. And then bang, something else happened decades later. And then once again, the second time it happened, it was much, much more profound. And once again, it was like, oh my God, I've reached the ultimate pinnacle of because and then at that point I could look back at that initial thing that happened and go, yeah, that was just like kids stuff. That was just like a little bit of taste. But this was the ultimate thing. Whoa, and between that there were other sort of little things that happened. For example, I'll give you one. I think I talked about this on the video channel before. Okay, a few years ago, there was a guy who was making a lot of noise on the internets because he had stopped thinking. I don't know what became of this guy, but he was all over the YouTubes and stuff 10 or 15 years ago. I don't remember, because he was getting a lot of hype among people who watch videos like this one, because he'd stopped thinking, and he was like, I have stopped thinking, like I never think anymore, no thoughts occur in my brain. And it's and he's like, whoa, and he was like telling people how amazing he was, and other people were going, yeah, you're amazing, you never think. And I remember watching one of his videos going, yeah, that happened to me. It happened to me at one point in my practice, just stopped. And I was like, whoa, that's really interesting, because all my life just chatter, blah 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 blah. I had just going blah 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 blah, and then one day it was like, whoa. It's like if you ever seen the Monkeys movie Head, there's a scene where Mickey Dolenz is in the desert, and his train of thought just stops, and the voice in his head goes, quiet, isn't it, George Michael Dolenz? And then he's going, oh, where's the voice in my head? It's but it wasn't like that for me, but it sort of reminded me of that. Just the voice in my head just stopped talking to me. And I thought it was pretty amazing too when that happened, but that was even before the big wow moment. So like lots of these things start happening, and there is probably a temptation among all of us for whom these things happen to want to rank them and to go, okay, there's level 1, there's level 2, there's level 3, there's level 4. And if you go through the literature of Buddhism, of which, if you're I'm in front of my bookshelf now, I tend to keep my rock and roll and pop culture and Three Stooges type books on the bottom shelves, and then my Buddhist literature is on the upper shelves. And so what you're seeing is the lower shelves. So you're seeing all the Ultraman and Frank Zappa and monster movie books down. But if you look in some of the books on the upper level shelves, you'll see, well, if you thumb through them, you'd see certain books that contain ranking systems where they're trying to rank the levels of enlightenment. And occasionally you'll run into people at meditation centers. I've run into them, and other people have told me stories about running into these people who study in schools of thought where they're ranking the levels of enlightenment and trying to compare each other and go, have you reached, and they'll have a name for them. And even in the story of Gautama Buddha, Shakyamuni Buddha's enlightenment, there's I can't remember it. It's the level of neither perception nor non-perception, and then the level of, I can't remember. But there's even stories of that early on in his practice where he reaches this level, and then there's the next level. And eventually, in that story, if I'm remembering it correctly, he abandons all that. And the Zen school also abandoned all of that, and it just stopped dealing with that. Because, here's the deal, there's no levels. And the reason there's no levels is because it's just infinite. It's infinite. No matter how far you go, there's another level. There's another level, and there's another level, and there's another level, and there's another level. You can't exhaust it. You can never ever exhaust it. And so, in a set of infinite things, there's no point in ranking any of them. Because it's like in a set of infinite numbers, the number 1 no longer has any significance at all. The number 1 has a significance in the set of positive numbers, right? I'm no math whiz, so I'm probably getting some of this wrong, but okay. If you're just counting positive numbers, right? If I remember my mathematics correctly, then the number 1 has significance because it's the first positive number, right? But if you start to include fractions and then you start to include negative numbers, then you've expanded the set to infinity, and then the number 1 no longer has any significance at all because because then you can go 0 and -1 and -2 and -3. So the number 1 no longer has any significance. It's just so the ranking system just falls apart completely, and that's what the Zen stream also recognized. It recognized that the ranking system just fell apart. So there's just no point in using it anymore. So you could rank them, and from the point of view of somebody just sort of starting on the path, it sort of seems to make sense. Because like I said at the beginning, that sort of initial spark that I had, 6 months or a year or whatever it was, I don't remember how long it took, very early on in my practice. Yeah, compared to what happened decades and decades later, as the story I told you, yeah, that was just a little peep. And then there was something much bigger that happened 15 or 20 years later, I don't remember. And so, yeah, you could rank them. You could say, okay, that was just a little peep, and then there was a much bigger one that happened 15 years later. But once you kind of open yourself up to the kind of infiniteness of this whole enlightenment thing, then all bets are off, as they say. None of this ranking stuff makes any sense at all. So, and having said all that and wasted all the time that I allotted myself to give an answer for this question, I realized that I really didn't answer this guy's question at all, and I feel bad for that. But anyway, I wanted to say that anyway, and the question sort of sparked that thing, and there you go. So, oops, I forgot to mention until I got to the editing of this video that I have a new podcast up, and it's hosted by Podbean, and the episode title is In the Light, Dogen's Divine Light Part 1, and it's a whole podcast all about this Dogen essay called Komyo, which I talked about on this video channel last week, and it's much longer. It's like an hour's talk about that, and you can find it wherever podcasts are podcasted. I find it on Spotify myself when I go looking for it, so it's on Apple or on Podbean supposedly sends it to all the podcast hosting services, so that's where you can find it. So go listen to that. And I forgot to mention it on the podcast itself, but if you listen to that podcast and have any questions about it, please send your questions to bw@hardcorezen.info. That is bw@hardcorezen.info, and those questions will help me put together further episodes of the podcast where I'm going to talk more about Komyo, about Dogen's Divine Light. So now I'm going to end the episode of the video as normal. So, okay, here, back to me. And if you want me to give you more answers or non-answers, or just whatevers to questions like that, you can donate to me, so I'll be able to keep doing this. And if you want to donate to me, you can go to the URL that you are seeing on your screen below, which is hardcorezen.info/donate. That is hardcorezen.info/donate. There you will find links to my Patreon and PayPal accounts. Those are my main and usually only ways of making a living, and I really appreciate your support. But as always, this is offered for free, so you don't have to support me if you don't want to support me. And what you heard at the beginning was my attempt at playing the bass line for Can't Stop by the Red Hot Chili Peppers, and I'll let you hear a little bit more of that as we play out, and I'll show you a little bit of Ziggy, the best dog in the world. So we will see you next time. Have a good time all the time. See you later. Bye. Hey Ziggy, I told him you were the best dog in the world. Do you agree? Do you agree that you're the best dog? I think you're the best dog. Yeah. Thank you for helping me out the other day. You were really good. All right. You're sitting in that sunbeam. That's why you're panting. That's why you're so hot. All right. We'll talk to you later. Bye, Ziggy.